prospects with potential, Stamkos as a center, and the Barry Trotz-o-meter. You've got questions, we've got answers on today's episode of the Locked On Predators podcast.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday to our Locked On Predators listeners. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day. We are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to welcome any first-time listeners, our everydayers, and of course want to say a special hello to our Locked On Predators insiders as we kick off a Monday mailbag episode. We appreciate your support, and we love that we get to talk Predators hockey with you. I'm Ann Kemell. I'm a writer with Penalty Box Radio, and my friends, I have a partner in crime.
You do. I'm Emma Lingen, and I'm the Nashville Predators site editor and reporter for the Hockey News.
We're going to open up that Monday mailbag with questions from our insiders and our listeners. We have a lot to cover, including how a handful of young players could impact the roster, how trustworthy is Barry Trotz, and some early Stamkos speculation. Before we dive into all your questions, we do want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, Emma, we actually just wrapped up our last non-hockey weekend for you and I. It is back at it. We've got rookie camp kicking off this week, and that just begins the snowball rolling down the hill. Are you ready for some hockey? Which I know it's supposed to be, are you ready for some football? But that already started, so.
I'm ready for hockey. I don't think you're ever ready for the just barrage of hockey that just comes out of nowhere every September, but we're going to try and ride the wave. It'll be fun to get back to the rink. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And again, rookie camp is going to be kicking off this week. Emma and I are going to have kind of an in-depth look at the rookies on the roster and just some storylines that may be big in rookie camp. We're going to cover that later on this week. But we have questions that our listeners, our insiders have sent to us. And so Emma and I are going to tackle some of those questions. And we're going to kick it off with one of the big topics of this offseason. And Emma, when you talk about this is going to be an exciting season, Steven Stamkos is a lot of the reason why. We got the question, what are the chances we see Stamkos move to center in the preseason?
Oh, almost 100. I would say, that's what the preseason is for. Like, right. You're testing out different, not necessarily, like, you go into camp, and I've talked about this before, like, you go into camp kind of knowing what your, plan A is going to be when right. It comes to lineups and, defense pairings and special teams units. Like, they already know, the coaching staff already knows going into training camp what plan A is. The point of training camp is really to figure out what plans B, C, and D are. So, like, if plan A does not work, where do we pivot from there? And so I think that a big part of, it's exactly what training camp and what preseason is for, is to see, like, all right, what do we got? I know I reference this example a lot, but it is a very recent one. And I just think it illustrates this so well. When Ryan McDonough was acquired from Tampa Bay and he came, and it was like, oh my God, so easy. It's going to be him and Matthias Ekholm. Ekholm's going to move over to the other side. That's an amazing second pairing behind Roman Josi and Dante Fabro. It's going to be perfect. Textbook. Yeah, didn't work. Did not look good. But they did not pivot from that until several weeks into the season. They didn't, it wasn't like they tried it in one preseason game and said, well, no, abort mission. It's they need time to figure things out. So I think, whether any listener is of the belief that yes, for sure he'll be at center, or yes, for sure he'll be at wing. I would say don't be so sure because that's what, you don't know what you don't know. And I think that it'll be interesting to see. I think he's absolutely going to have to, he'll definitely be getting reps there. But obviously, and this is what we spend all off season doing, right? Is trying to project what the team's going to look like, what the roster, what the lineup's going to look like. And I think you have these ideas in your head of, what it should be on paper. And then, as Barry Trotz likes to say, you don't play the game on paper. So it might not look, maybe I'm just completely, this is not going to happen. But truly, you never know. It's maybe the best thing that happens is or the best lineup they come up with, Steven Stamkos is on the third line. I don't know. I mean, that won't happen. But
anything could happen. Anything could happen.
You never know. Remember, Juuso Parssinen started on the top line.
That's right.
You never know.
Yep. And I agree with you. I think that when you bring in the pieces like Stamkos, like Marchessault, on the blue line, you're bringing in Brady Shea. There are a lot of options that Andrew Brunette is going to have to sort through. Here's something I will say about Andrew Brunette that I noticed, and this was, of course, just in one season. We'll see how this continues, but he tends to do things on a shorter leash. You talked about how they let that Matthias Ekholm, Ryan McDonough trial go on maybe a little bit long. Andrew Brunette, to me, almost errs on the side of let's not waste time. And so, we've talked about Tommy Novak maybe centering a line with Marchessault and Stamkos. I don't know how long of a leash Tommy Novak is going to get from Andrew Brunette. So I'm with you. I think they have an idea of plan A. And then it's just going to be, if it doesn't hit it out of the park, how are we going to rotate things around? The upside, I think, is that there are a lot of options. Yes. I think when you add the pieces that they've added and you have the pieces that they have, there are a number of options, but there is a time constraint. You got to kind of nail this stuff down in training camp. So it'll be interesting for me to see how quickly Andrew Brunette pulls the trigger on moving to plan B and C, because to me last season with the lineup, he really is not one to let things linger. Whether it's benching a player or switching up a line, if he doesn't like something, he's going to move on.
Yeah. And I think, another thing, obviously the roster this year looks very different than it did last year, but in many ways it's a lot deeper. And so one of maybe the biggest critiques that at least I had of Andrew Brunette last season, not saying that I thought he did a bad job by any means, but if I were to critique his first season with the Predators, what I would say is that he relied too heavily on the veterans. He relied too heavily on the top line. Right. And on, Roman Josi, Ryan McDonough, guys who should not be necessarily, you don't want them to have to play that many minutes. And I think now you do have a much deeper roster. Again, it's deeper with more veterans, but still, maybe that means still that, deep. Yeah. So I think that'll, how that kind of pans out with ice time, and especially on special teams, things like that. I think it'll have a lot to do with it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting. Training camp is going to be fascinating this season, I think, for a lot of reasons. Of course, incorporating Stamkos, Marchessault, Brady Shea, how all of that is going to sort out like we're talking about here. But also, where are the spaces for some of these younger players? Coming up, we are going to take a look at some of Nashville's young prospects who are going to be at rookie camp this week. How do we see them potentially impacting the franchise next season? And how much do we trust Barry Trotz? We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Look, you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we've got something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So be sure you check out all the action at FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com. Download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Emma, this was a great question. I thought we got this on YouTube from Dream Big Paris. Great YouTube name. Do you believe in Trotz as a GM? I think we were spoiled with David, and to me, it looks like Barry has done okay, but not great so far. Thoughts?
I think that's a very broad question. It's a good question. But I also say it's one that I don't think it's fair to answer yet in terms, especially if you're going to compare him to David, who has literally had this job longer than anyone in the league. He's obviously got a much larger body of work. And also remember that all GMs are different. In the way that they operate and the way that they run things. And I do think that Barry has a lot of David in him, in terms of how he, operates and how he runs the organization. He's also got some Lou Lamoriello in him, and, that kind of creates a unique blend. But, I think he, again, this is only year 2. We're only entering year 2 of Barry. And I think that Barry Trotz has been, for his first year, I think he's done a really good job, not just because of moves that he has made, but I think moves he hasn't made, to be quite honest. Even with things like the trade deadline last year, all the players he could have moved and who teams would have wanted, but he didn't, because he didn't want to take an unfair offer. And he, kind of wanted to set his reputation in the GM community and not get taken advantage of. And I think that yes, he's made these big splashy signings, which is very not David Poile. It's not David Poile to make multiple of those signings, at a time. Yes. But I think that it's, Predators fans are not used to that because they've only ever had David running the organization. So it's different. And I think ultimately the test of whether he'll be, a good GM or a trustworthy GM has to do with, we'll look back in a few years and see.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. I think this is a tough question to answer right now, because 2 to 4 years from now, we're going to know if the bold moves that Trotz has made in his first 2 seasons are going to pay off or going to be a bust. And he's leaned really heavily into bringing in veterans. And if his first season is any indication, he and Andrew Brunette can get a lot out of those veterans. And I think that is key. I think that's really important. I am hoping we see a little bit more with the younger players, which is tricky because, again, this is a packed roster and it's got a lot of veterans in it. So you kind of have to balance bringing in these veterans, which I think he's done a great job of, with making sure you're developing and giving opportunities to younger players as well. And the Predators have a really solid prospect pipeline. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for Barry Trotz to lead the Predators franchise to some success in the next couple of seasons. And then beyond that, because we've talked about that, like he has set them up for short-term success, but also not sacrifice long-term opportunity as well. I do wonder, and I think that this will be interesting, everybody is really up at arms about the Yaroslav Askarov, and we've lost this, top prospect. Well, got some stuff back in return, which I think is important. And I also think at some point, Barry Trotz just kind of was not going to belly up to the bar with some of the things that, just sort of the demands that Yaroslav Askarov wanted, the timeline that he wanted. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch that. I think Askarov is in a place where he could develop into something really special with the Sharks where they're at. But I don't necessarily think that counts against Barry Trotz. Again, it's like you say, sometimes you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, Kenny Rogers says. And Barry Trotz, I think so far has done a good job with that. You just have to wait and see what the results are. Like, they're set up for success, potential. There's a lot of potential right now.
Right. There you can see a scenario, like a very reasonable, very plausible scenario in which this team as it's currently set up will be successful. It's not like we're sitting here. I think the biggest red flag would be like if we're sitting here like, all right, what's the plan? And that's kind of where we were for a lot of last year, to be honest with you. And then, the UC Saros contract, happened, and then that's when the rest of the chips fell into place and everything, that it just made it clear, okay, we have a plan here. And I think that is the biggest indicator. If you're asking me right now, would I trust Barry Trotz? Like, if I own the Predators, would I trust Barry Trotz to run this team? The answer right now is yes, because he has made a plan. He's executed that plan. Now, we have no guarantee that the plan will be successful. You never do. Nothing in life is guaranteed. So it'll be about what happens. Let's say the plan fails miserably. Okay, let's see how how he rebounds from that and how he pivots, how he adjusts, whatever it is. So I think that, it's too early to determine. I know this wasn't the question of whether he's a good GM or a bad GM. It's too early to determine that. The question is, do you trust him? And my answer to that is yes.
He's made bold moves, but the moves that Barry Trotz has made have been wise, bold moves. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, he's not banking on something that doesn't have a history. Steven Stamkos has a history. Now, he's going to be in a different team, in a different role. How successful is he going to be? There's some questions there. But I think the bold moves that Barry Trotz is making are based in wisdom and their numbers to back it up. So I agree with you. I think potential, he's very trustworthy. What the result of that will be, we're going to have to kind of wait and see. Yeah. Another question that we had, and this is about, like we just talked about with Barry Trotz, younger players. One of our insiders says, I want to hear more about Joakim Kemell. Is he going to see some games in the show this season? Has the potential to be a sniper, I reckon. I reckon you are right. So Joakim Kemell, last season was his first full season in Milwaukee, played 67 games, 16 goals, 41 points, finished 4th in points in Milwaukee in the regular season, 3rd in goals behind Igor Afanasyev and Zachary Leroux. First, coincidentally, in power play goals. Only had 1 power play goal in the playoffs. He had 15 games, played 15 games, 11 points there. One of the things that I love about Joakim Kemell is that he reminds me, and this may blow all to pieces this season when I see it in front of my eyes, but he reminds me on the power play a little bit of a Steven Stamkos. He's got that office and he's got that really amazing shot, but he's 20 years old, Emma, and there's not a ton of space on this roster. So do you think that we will see him in the regular season and, just sort of gauge where you think his potential is?
I'm going to say no, we don't see him this year. It's not for lack of skill or anything like that. It's for the reasons you just mentioned. Given where this team is, they're trying to win a Stanley Cup right now. They're not trying to get development opportunities like that. How many coaches and GMs have said it? The NHL is not a developmental league. Like, you're not coming to develop. You need to come to us fully cooked, especially if we're trying to go win a Stanley Cup. And I think, Kemell has been, he was really successful his first, little stint with the Admirals. He came and joined them for the playoffs, not this last season, but the season before. Looked really good. He did I don't want to say he took a step back this year. He didn't look bad by any means. I mean, based on the numbers that you just listed, but I think it was a little bit more of a reality check for all of us that like, oh yeah, remember everybody, Luke Evangelista is the exception. We do not
Thank you.
usually see guys just skyrocket to the NHL, in their first year of, in Kemell's first years, or in his case, it was his first year of North American hockey. He's young. He is very skilled. I think with the roster the Predators have now and where he is in his development process, it would not behoove either the team or the player to have him up at any point during this year. So that's why I'm going to say no, but is he a player I'm very excited about and excited to see what he does this year, especially now that he's had a full year of pro hockey under his belt in North America? Absolutely.
Yes, I agree with you too. I think it's such a great point about Luke Evangelista. We've talked about him last week with Paige Martin, and Evangelista made, definitely had up and downs in the NHL, but he made the transition from AHL to NHL look a lot smoother than it is in reality. And you look at Kemell and he is 20 years old. Like you said, first season of North American hockey. He has a great shot. He's kind of a physical guy. I think he has a lot that the Predators are going to love, but there's no reason to rush him. You give him another couple of seasons and he's going to be able to hit the NHL with a little bit easier leap because there is a gap between those two leagues. And I think the more experience that players like him get in the AHL, a little smoother the transition will be when the Predators need them a couple of seasons from now. Again, Luke Evangelista, the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, he spoiled us, you
He
guys.
did.
And that's not normal. And I think that, Kemell is one, Fedor Svechkov is another one.
Love him.
I hear the two of them, kind of mentioned together a lot as like, oh, are we going to see them this year? It's like, frankly, no, because there's, the way I see it with what Barry Trotz has done this offseason and, the message that he sent, this is the plan. We're trying to go win a cup right now. Quite frankly, if we see either Joakim Kemell or Fedor Svechkov in the NHL this year, that's a very bad thing,
Right.
because
That
it means
injuries.
It means injuries. It means that we've just given up. It means like it's a sign of something bad. It's not like, because I'm sorry, I don't care if, Kemell or Svechkov or whoever has the season of his life down in Milwaukee. He's not getting a roster spot over Jonathan Marchessault. It's not going to happen. So I think, it's one of those, am I excited about those players? For sure. I think that they have a lot, they can contribute, but they are the reason that, and we've talked about this before, about how Barry Trotz, when he made all these moves to improve the team now, or to make this roster better now, he did not leverage the future. And these guys are the future. Like,
Yes.
Steven Stamkos, his contract 4 years, Marchessault 5 years, Roman Josi, Philip Forsberg, again, all these guys who aren't getting any younger. That is the timeline that lines up perfectly with where these kids are in their development process. Like, they're going to get a couple years, if all works out, like a couple years of the two kind of overlapping.
Yes.
And they get to learn from the older players. And as they, transition out, this new wave of, leaders transitions in. And so it's set up very well, not just for the immediate term, but for the long term.
I agree with you. It's again the beauty of what Barry Trotz has done so far. Very much set up for success. A lot of potential long term, as well as like the next 2 to 4 years. It's going to be great to watch all of this unfold. We did mention rookie camp kicking off this week. We have a question from one of our insiders about an advantage or disadvantage to some of these players at rookie camp. Plus, we're going to talk about what Elliot Fredman had to say about the Nashville Predators. Want to thank you for making Locked On Predators your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day with national experts and local insight on every team in the league. It's available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Got this great question from one of our insiders, and I just thought it was really an interesting thing to think about. Is it a benefit or a disadvantage to go to camp with other NCAA players that you may face in the season if sent back to college? And the same thing when you're talking about players in juniors. So we have players coming to rookie camp that play in juniors. We have several players who are in the NCAA. Is it an advantage or disadvantage to see them all together at rookie camp? I thought this is a really good question.
I certainly don't think it's a disadvantage at all. I mean, if anything, it's an advantage. I mean, plus it's not even just at, other Predators rookies, but they're going to be playing in the rookie tournament with prospects from Carolina, Florida, Tampa, and it's interesting. I remember this from last year's rookie tournament, talking to Kalen Lind because it was his first tournament. He actually got in a fight during one of the games.
Yes.
And I asked him about it afterwards, and I was like, what was being said down there? And he's like, yeah, I knew that guy. Like, I know that guy I played against him in the dub. He called him a name that I won't repeat, but I think it's like he had a reputation and he knew that, because he's played against this guy before and, has experience with him, he kind of knows what his game is like and what his personality is like. And so I think the same would go for guys who are, prospects on the same team as you, that, it helps kind of having experience, I guess, like playing alongside each other or playing against each other. I mean, it helps you learn more, I think, about the other player, which can be a benefit to the player when he goes back to juniors, for example, and it's like, oh, I just spent 3 weeks playing with this guy and now I'm facing him, and so now I have his number. Like, I mean, I think if anything, it would be an advantage for the player.
Yeah, I would agree with that. One of the things that I love about Dev Camp and about Rookie Camp is watching the future Predators players kind of building those relationships. And you see it a lot with draft classes because they kind of all come in at the same time and they're all sort of experiencing Dev Camp at the same time. I remember Igor Surin talked about, they're all my friends. They're my friends now.
That was so precious.
Like, we are all your friends now. Igor, come to American Thanksgiving at my house.
Yes.
But so there is kind of an interesting relationship among prospects where they come together and they see each other at these camps. But they do carry some of what they see from these players when they play against them as well. So I do think there is an advantage to it. I don't think that you necessarily totally change the outcome of games because you know what Matthew Wood's tendencies are. But you probably play Matthew Wood a lot better if you've seen his tendencies in camp too. So yeah, I just thought that was a really interesting question. And again, I just think it's fun to watch the on ice familiarity, but also the off ice familiarity that these players build when they come to Dev Camp and Rookie Camp. Elliot Fredman on his latest 32 Thoughts podcast with his new co-host talked about thoughts on each of the 32 teams in the offseason. And so just wanted to touch base real quick on what he had to say about Nashville. Talked about Nashville being a destination city for players, as opposed to maybe when it first kicked off in the league and they really struggled to get players to come here. He also said a lot of talent on this team. Fredman's looking forward to seeing how the players line up together, especially on the power play. Elliot Fredman, we feel that. We're 100% here for that. Didn't mention that Tomasino and Parson, two players that the Predators fans need to kind of keep an eye on, but those contracts are a grind, he said. Are we going to get those contracts done soon, do you think, Emma?
I mean, I don't really have another option, to be honest with you.
Could we just?
Got to be done pretty soon. Yeah, I'm not gonna. I genuinely have no insider information regarding those contracts, so I'm not gonna say anything because I don't want to, as we talked about last week, speculating versus reporting, two very different things. They are a grind though, and there are still some, this is not uncommon throughout the league. I mean, guys like Jeremy Swayman still don't have a contract. Like it's pretty common, and the sense of urgency does tend to speed these things up. And we're now getting to the start of camp, and
it'd be nice to have it done. Be nice to have it done.
It would be.
It would
and
be.
as far as Nashville being a destination city, I mean, I think that's no secret. I think guys like coming here, so many guys who have maybe played for Nashville in the past and either got traded or retired or signed somewhere else in free agency. The vast majority of them still live here during the off season. People, the no state income tax, do not underestimate that as a tool for luring people in, because that is a big selling point.
That's a chunk of change.
Especially for these guys, like looking at, obviously Leon Draisaitl just signed his enormous contract with the Oilers last week. And, a lot of that people are talking about, it's so much money. What are they going to do with Connor McDavid now when he's up for a new contract and all this stuff? I didn't think about it. In Canada, he is paying so much in taxes on that, it almost offsets. And so and I remember back when Philip Forsberg signed his contract in Nashville, and it was like, people were saying that it's not enough or whatever, but it's like he could have gotten more in another city. It's like maybe on paper, but he would have been paying more in taxes. So that's why it's like it's an attractive place to come, and the players absolutely factor that in.
Yeah. And Nashville is a great city for, players coming in, as evidenced by this weekend. Cole Smith hosted the Preds fishing tournament on Old Hickory Lake. Emma and I were going to try to bid on fishing with Cole Smith, but we figured he couldn't handle the truth. Nor could we. Philip Forsberg hosted his annual hockey clinic, but I think the most interesting thing that happened this weekend, I found out about compliments of Luke Evangelista's social media. Did you see this, Emma?
The boys were on stage with Dirk Bentley.
We're on stage with Dirk Bentley. And can I tell you the thing I loved most about this, Emma, was that Steven Stamkos was there and was looking happy. And I'm like, welcome. This is Dirk Bentley. Can we introduce you to Dolly Parton or Garth Brooks?
Yes. I think it's funny. I actually remember when I first moved here for the job with the Predators, and I think it might have been Dirk Bentley again. All the guys went to the concert, and they went out afterwards, and that was the first time I met Ryan McDonough. And it was funny because for things like that, it's mostly, and if you look, most of the guys who were on stage, I saw the video briefly. It was like Cole Smith, Luke Evangelista, Kaylin Lynn, Tanner Molendyke, the younger guys, and maybe the guys who don't have, wives and kids at home. And then you got Steven Stamkos out there. And it's like, good for him.
I loved that. And, at Bridgestone Arena, the ice is in. What a great, and Dirk Bentley, huge Predators fan, y'all. Huge Predators fan, huge hockey fan.
His son plays hockey. And so he's a big hockey dad. He goes to the games and he's big fan.
Yeah. So I thought that was so amazing. Looked like a great time. Love the energy. Loved seeing, I just love seeing Steven Stamkos with the team doing something fun, enjoying Nashville. So let's hear it for Dirk Bentley hosting the boys.
Yep.
I thought that was amazing. We did not have quite as much fun this weekend, but that's okay.
Well, you might have. You were at the beach.
That's why I did actually have that much fun.
I watched a lot of football, which was fun for me, but I would have liked to be at the beach.
Yeah. Oh, Titans next week. We'll get them next week. That's all we'll say about that on today's episode. Before we sign off this week, want to let you know that Emma and I are going to be, of course, covering rookie camp, and we're going to have a preview, some storylines to be watching for out of rookie camp. Also want to let you know about our Locked On Predators Insider program. If you are looking to continue the conversation beyond the podcast, you need to join our Insider program via subtext. You'll be able to chat with Emma and I. We're going to be giving some more information and insider information and stats during games. So you can check out that information in the description of this video as well. Before we sign off though, Emma, let everyone know where they can find you and your work.
You can find me on social media at Emma_Lingen, and you can find my work at the Hockey News.
And you can find me on social media at AnnK_Mama on Ice. You can find my work at Penalty Box Radio as well. That is going to do it for this Monday Mailbag episode of the Locked On Predators podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We will be back later this week with that rookie camp preview. We will see you then.